very often closely affiliated with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or with the government, and them I would venture to call BRICS optimists. Their major arguments can be summarized this way. They would even go as far as to sometimes hypothesize about the emergence of the new G5. The optimists would stress the economic growth, the territory, the population, the demographic growth of all the 4 BRICS countries except for Russia, the upward mobility, the social lifts, and the emerging new class as the important source of domestic consumption. They would also stress that the 5 countries are very well prepared to turn economic growth into political influence. The world crisis contributed, in their view, to the BRICS cooperation. This cooperation would help to overcome the crisis, and indeed it did help to overcome the crisis. They would even say that the BRICS countries perform the function of the locomotive, a driver for the exit from the crisis and for molding the post-crisis environment. As for the common interests, taking into account all the differences and sometimes tensions and even conflicts between the 5 of us, the optimists would say that we are united in the desire to reform, in the first place, IMF and World Bank. We are united in a new global financial and economic regulation, in a desire to create a more equitable financial architecture, along the lines mentioned by President Medvedev a couple of years ago. We are all very much commonly interested in issues of international security, fight against international terrorism, energy security, information security, etc., etc. Then comes ecology, climate, space, and finally the goal of the new multipolar world order. Russia, with the BRICS countries, may enjoy something which beats my understanding: privileged strategic partnerships. If we turn to the pessimists, those experts who are skeptical about the reality and the prospects of the BRICS, they would go as far as to call publicly, and it's on the record, the BRICS as the virtual association, non-institutional, purely symbolic, created especially for specific political purposes, with internal contradictions, representing different cultures and different civilizations, very different political regimes, as was already mentioned, with no prospects for real economic and political cooperation. They would also argue that practically for most of our member states, relations with the West, with the US and European Union, are probably more important than relations between the member states. I would want to stress one argument, which I would consider to be a very important one, especially in the line of my argumentation. All the 5 economies represent different types, different models of economic growth. For Russia, it's energy. For Brazil, resources and commodities. For India and China, commodities and services. This brings the pessimists to the question: does Russia really fit the format of the BRICS, especially not because the recession of 8%, but because of the specific type of growth, because of the resource curves, because of the demography, and, as I've said, because of the severe recession during 2009. Russia's economic performance was the worst during the crisis among the BRIC countries, and sometimes the pessimists would argue that after the crisis, Russia would become the outsider within the BRICS. What about public opinion? I was struck to learn during this couple of hours that the rank-and-file Brazilians or Rio de Janeiroans know a lot about BRICS because of TV, because of public statements, etc., etc. I hardly think this is the case in Russia. When I was preparing to come here, I scanned all the major public opinion companies and public opinion polls. There was not a single public opinion poll taken in Russia during the last years concentrating on the BRICS. There were all sorts of public opinion polls about UN, NATO, WTO, etc., none about the BRICS. This is not to say that Russians are not interested in individual countries. Indeed, they are. One of the latest public opinion polls, April, asked the respondents to name countries with which the respondents would like Russia to establish and maintain the most friendly and close relations. Believe me or not, China, number 1. Number 6, India. 17, Brazil. And something which will tell you a lot about the general foreign policy orientations of the Russian public. When asked about foreign policy orientations, Russians, 48% of the Russians would say it's Western Europe, 43 CIS, and 23 India and China. I'm bringing this data to the floor just to stress the fact that Russian public opinion, irrespective of whatever we can hear about this, is predominantly oriented towards the West, towards Western Europe. Now comes my second point. How can we perceive Russia through the BRICS prism, through the lenses of the BRICS experience? And again, I would raise the issue, but I will not give you the answer. The question is, to what extent Russia belongs, fits the BRICS, and what are specific issues Russia has to settle, to solve, in order to be considered part of the BRICS? Internally, psychologically, politically. In the first place, what to do with the imperial legacy and the absence of clear post-communist identity. Russia within the BRICS finds itself among the rapidly but developing countries, which for the traditional Russian Soviet mentality would be considered as shocking. Taking into account the longing